Let me just get a quick, teachers in the room, building leaders in the room, district leader building. Okay, cool. You're welcome.
I'm going to go to a different
Sarah.
session, but hi. I wanted to come talk to you a little bit, but I have to go to a different session. So.
Email me, call me, we'll do that, we'll make that happen.
Cool.
I'll leave that up there, so yeah, totally good. So my whole goal is to leave all of the rest of my toolbox around learning space design in Iowa. So there's some things that I haven't said over the last 2 days that I'm excited about. My journey around this work has been really interesting. I was a middle school principal for a long time, and now I have served as kind of director of innovation, which means a whole lot of nothing but everything. I think now that my job is that anything that gets plugged in is my fault. I don't know if anybody else has this job. Like if the laminator breaks, I'm like, I'm not in charge of laminator. Someone brought me a vacuum cleaner one time because it plugs in. Apparently it was my fault. But really over the last 5 years, I've been doing a ton of work to help teachers, schools, and districts rethink their space. And mostly school districts that absolutely aren't saying like, hey, we have a huge bond issue, we're building a new school, we're adding all this stuff, but how do we do that? So tons of really practical ideas coming out of this, and a couple of chances for you guys to share what you guys are doing in that work as well. So that's my daughter Ellie, that's who's playing volleyball this afternoon. But I put her up there for a reason. She is the straight A, driven kid. And you may know that kid in your class or that kid in your school, and she is the kid that, as soon as she takes a test, 5th hour, by the time she gets home, she's checked the online gradebook 3 times to see if the score's in there yet. And I mention that not because she's not going to be academically successful. I'm worried that she's going to get burned out and stressed out because of school. And so one of the reasons that learning space design means a ton to me is that our kids should be able to step into our schools and our spaces and feel less stressed than they do in the real world. And I think right now we have lots of spaces that kids go into and their stress level goes up as opposed to goes down. I know there's an appropriate amount of stress, so don't get me wrong. There's an appropriate amount of stress, but we have kids that walk into a space and they're uncomfortable, they're unhappy, they're not enjoying what's going on, and that's leading this whole thing. We know the #1 problem that kids tell us right now is stress and anxiety. And so our learning spaces have an opportunity to help that or hinder that. And so for her, I worry about that. On the other side, that's my daughter Emily. Emily is my daughter that needs to move around. And I don't know if anybody else has a child like this, but it's exhausting. But she is the kid that in a classroom, she can't be in one place for very well or her brain starts to shut down. Right? She's just not learning. And many of you in a few moments are going to think the same thing. This guy's talking about needing to move around and our brains are going to shut down. So I'll get you guys up to move in a second. But her problem is that she is the only kid in her classroom that has permission to move around. Right? And if you do that and you don't have a culture of that where kids can move appropriately around classrooms, then learning spaces aren't doing what they need to do. So a couple things. So I'm going to ask you this question. Where do you learn? I say learn, but where do you read best? Let me just pick on somebody. Where do you read best?
Bed.
Okay. Where do you read best?
Chair in the living room.
Okay. Where do you read best, sir? Okay. How do you know that? Okay. How did you learn that?
Trial and error.
Okay. Where do you discuss best?
Kitchen table.
At the kitchen table. Where do you discuss best?
Yeah, living room.
In the living room. Where do you discuss best?
In the car.
Okay. Yeah, I think we learn these things as adults by trial and error. But I think we have an opportunity as we think about learning space design to start with 5-year-olds until they're 15, helping them to learn those skills because we're in a day and age where you have to know where you do what best. So I tell folks all the time that this is a college and career readiness thing, right? Kids moving into a career that their work environment might be 84 different places. It might be an airport, it might be an airport lobby, and it might be Starbucks. You have to know what things you can do in those places well. And right now, here's what we're telling kids. You can do everything well in that desk. And it's just not the truth. So how can we help to build capacity around kids when it comes to learning space so they know where they learn what best? And I think that people get this, communities get this and families get this. They get the idea that we do need to prepare kids for different types of jobs, but it's also about excelling and doing the things and the roles in those jobs. Where do you do those things best? So as we think about that, I also think about Learning space design, 2 reasons. 1, because we want to help kids to where they learn what best, but 2, we know that brain research tells us, the research is there that says that learning spaces are impacting kids. And so it supports brain-based learning. And so in my mind, the real kind of crux of this is that we think about instruction, technology, and learning spaces as part of the work. And so some of us aren't in that place yet. So this is a question for me though, and this becomes a question for you. So everybody will stand up for a second. I promise you I won't make you talk to anyone if you don't want to. All my introverted friends are like, really? It's one of those sessions where I have to stand up? Just, yeah, this is really about standing up for the sake of standing up, because sometimes our bodies need to do that after we sat and had to listen to Joe for an hour. I mean, that's exhausting in and of itself. And so I'll try not to talk as fast as he is, but we both are about the same cadence of things. So I noticed that. How are you breaking tradition, momentum, and inertia in your classroom or your school around learning spaces? I'm going to give you an example of how you're breaking the inertia of tradition, momentum, or inertia in your classroom. Go ahead.
Last summer I got rid of a lot of junk and clutter and old things that hadn't been touched by teachers years previous to me.
Okay, awesome. How else is that happening for folks?
Encouraging flexible seating in anticipation of a new building opening.
Okay, awesome. Kind of doing year 0 work. Yeah.
I have different spaces for when we're doing a lesson and when they can do their work, so get the lesson and then go to the spot and work.
Nice, and you have that freedom to kind of let kids go to those spaces at work. So I would just say that this is the #1 thing around this work, is that we're in kind of a rut about here's what a room's supposed to look like, here's what this is supposed to be, and great, if you have a couch and that's purposeful, great. If you don't, that's okay too. If you're like a person that says, I just need to get rid of some things, you have to break the inertia of what's going on, because it's really hard to envision what is possible with the current reality stuck in where it is. So I'll give you a couple of things as we go forward that can help break that inertia and momentum. One more question for you. What do you see in this picture? Somebody just kind of give me the big, what do you see in this picture? All right, what else?
It's a real tight space.
It is a real tight space. What else? Does anybody know what this is? It is a school bus. So there's a group, Flagler County, Florida, has built a school bus because they wanted to explain to their families in their community what the work around modernizing classrooms look like. So they'll have small meetings in here. They'll take this out on the road to community centers. I love the idea, though, that we're talking about what the purpose of this is and taking that to our community. Because it goes right back to what Joe said about like people think what happens inside of the schools is what happened when they were there. But they're starting to show a modern classroom matters. And I think you got to be able to tell that story over and over and over so people don't feel like you're just experimenting on your kids. I'll let you sit down in 1 second here. This is a STEM space in a hallway. You know, 1/3 of all the square feet in schools is hallway space. We have to do something to make sure that that is contributing to the learning. Right? We've walked down these awful hallways in schools before. You can actually probably envision them. They decided that they were going to take something and make learning a part. And I've seen that happen over and over and over in places. All right, you guys can have a seat. That's important. Like even doing that, you know what? I've seen more and more classrooms do this, like start class just like we did there, for a couple of reasons. One, we always tell kids, hey, come in and sit down. And oftentimes, subconsciously, that tells kids, like, come in and sit down and like shut your brain down. And so I'm watching more and more high school and middle school classes start like just in a standing circle, right? Like, hey, huddle up. And I really did start in school with like football coaches, like, well, huddles work in sports, why can't I use them academically? Right now, you may need kids to write things down, but like there are moments where you're just talking to kids, and you know the best way to get kids off their tech is to have them stand up. Right? Like just stand up. Like it's really hard to be rude with their phone. Now I know some kids will do it, right? Like their phone's right in front of you, they're like this, they'll do that. But when everyone's standing up, no one's looking at their computer, no one's doing what they need to do. And it's a great way to kind of break the momentum of what we always do. Because I mean kids, if you don't even say anything, kids will walk into your room and they'll come in and sit down. Because they've been conditioned to do that. That doesn't happen in like a pre-K classroom. If you ever work in pre-K, kids know, they don't come in and sit down. They don't know that that's what they're supposed to do. We teach that to them. We kind of have to unteach that as we kind of go. One of the things that I've learned is that most folks don't have what I see as like a designer's mindset. And it really has 4 elements. I'm going to ask you which one of these is the strength for you and which one isn't. One is that the designer sees connections, right? Like they go to a museum and they're like, holy cow, I should do that. Like one of the things, my favorite things in a museum is the little artist statement, right? What we don't have on a lot of our bulletin boards in schools and classrooms and out in the hallways is that statement that says like, oh, now that makes sense. I was in a room the other day and I walked up and I was like, wow, there's 25 panda bears with pink stomachs. That's cute, right? And then I walked up and I was like, oh, she's making the connection with like, right? But we walk down hallways that have these beautiful displays of student work and no explanation. So designers say things like, oh, at the museum I saw the impact that that made, so I'm going to bring that in. Or hey, I was at a WeWork and I saw this really cool thing, I'm going to bring that in. And folks that are continuing to think like this, whether you're a teacher or a leader, are starting to make connections beyond school and bring them in as it has to do with learning space design. The second one is that they're huge advocates for the work, right? What I'm learning from teachers over the last 5 years is this piece. They say, hey, we get it in our classroom, we're doing some amazing things, but unless this is a building level initiative, we're not going to have a multiplicative effect. So here's what happens, like this one second grade teacher is knocking it out of the park. She knows the research. She's not decorating her room, it's not cute, neat, and fancy. It's actually like really helping learning. And then that one classroom's doing it, and kids come in, they're like, oh, we're like in the carnival classroom. And then they go to the next year and they don't have that, they don't have that. And so, but I don't want to make this excuse, right? And I always hated this as a middle school principal. My 8th grade teachers would say this to me, like, well, you know, we've got to get them ready for the high school. I'm like, does that mean we have to treat them like crap this whole year so that they, you know, like, there was this like awful thing, like, well, you know they're not going to take homework late at the high school. And you know that's not how it is in the real. I'm like, well, how about if we just do good things for kids here and let them deal with their own problems up there? Now, I do think like there's a little bit of that, but like we do so much of like, we need to prepare them for really crappy things. Let's get them ready for that. And we just drag that all the way down. I hear kindergartner teachers saying that about, well, you know, in first grade, they're not going to let them. I'm like, what do you just do kindergarten right? And so when I think about that, you're advocating for the right stuff as a leader. And some of you are teacher leaders in the building. You're heads of grade levels and heads of teams and heads of departments. I count all of that in that designer's mindset. The other two that go along with this, like the futurist idea, right? Like, hey, I'm making sure that no one thinks what's happening inside of my classroom and inside of this building is stuck in the past. Right? I'm not saying that old school stuff isn't important, but there's all these things that we can continue to do to tinker about them, and designers are thinking about that. And finally, your energizers for the building. There are so many energy vampires that we all live with, and everyone uses a different term around that. I like what Joe put Jimmy Casas' thing up there about I don't remember what he calls people, like the awfulizers, right? And I said, well, it's not energy vampires, but we know these people, like, you see them coming at the happy hour last night from across the bar, and you're like, I gotta go to the bathroom. Like, you're running away, you know these people in your building, right? Like, and maybe you're like, oh, wait, if I don't know any of those people in the building, maybe it's me. But, like, I think that ultimately, we have to be the person that brings joy and energy to the building. And some days we know we can't do that, but like in general, designers are doing those 4 things. So, of those 4, which is your strength and which is your opportunity? I'm going to have this side of the room circle up and kind of stand up around here and have that conversation. And if you 4 folks would do that same thing, that would be awesome. Which of those is a strength and which of those is an opportunity? I'll run that through with you. We talked about connecting, advocating, being a futurist, and being an energizer. Now, once we have that down, I'm going to go through some real practical things you can try in your classroom. So we'll stand up and have that conversation. Which is your strength and where's your opportunity around those 4 things? Thank you guys for doing that. I appreciate it.
I got to advocate. I know good stuff on school.
If someone wants to jump in that other group because they're like, hey, ours is too big, it doesn't really matter. But if you want to go over there, you can. That's totally fine.
I'm probably like an energizer. Not at the current moment, but usually I'm the one in the hallway like, let's go, let's do some science, let's learn some math. And everyone's just Iowa. That's all that matters.
Yeah. I'd probably say energizer too. Yeah, just coming in close with James trying to focus on the
future. One of the guys coming to the left, like, what the gap is like a good industry.
You're in line close.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. Yeah.
Details, everything relates.
I think they're good. We're not teaching us on all of those, you know, like a little bit. Both opportunities and strengths.
outcome coach, so I get to connect them and meet people.
Like 5 minutes of that unit. Exactly. And I'm doing it because I think my son's first grade.
This is not like a really cool thing.
Or stopping.
Little, and not that little kids
And
can do
second
things,
is
but
that
there's
just
so much
doesn't
more
work. Then
guiding
the rest
scaffolding
of
to get them to the big thing that you have to make sure it comes right from here and the right, things before that, so I just find those connections.
Basically, for that one, so just even as you're saying, like, it's only like in 7th and 8th grade, and they're not gonna take a crap. I'm not Let's have fun. Let's learn 6th grade. You'll be when you're over there, and you'll have fun. I'm not gonna scare you about it. That's scary.
I'm not negative. I can be, but so I'm like more tech side and making it work. So I tend to let's just stay here. So I could take things up a notch, especially with the kids involved. And that part's hard to do.
Cameras have been up for a week.
Yes. That's
So in the same line of buildings, just finding opportunities to share and looking at your side as well as just the opportunity to change.
Yeah, so you gotta be a little bit creative. Having failed in different locations.
Smaller numbers.
Do we have to?
And faster, as a little round table.
Awesome.
There you go. What else should we get at?
While you're where you are, yeah, sorry. Stay where you are. We're good for just 1 second before you sit back down. Remember, like that, we don't have to all get. Everybody was ready to default to sit back down, like just in our beginning. Let me mention a couple things, and I'll have you guys sit down. I'm way too close to the camera. That's gonna like freak out people watching that, so I'm gonna stand over here. They can edit that out later. One of the things, and as I mentioned some of these solutions kind of going forward, and really kind of be rapid fire here for a few minutes, is that one of the things that I'm seeing, and I keep mentioning things that I see as best practice around the country. I get to travel around, work with schools, and do amazing things to help people kind of transform. But one of the things I'm seeing in a lot of classrooms are people now are naming their classroom metaphor. And this is something that I never expected to see, but folks are saying things like this. We want our classroom to be like a nest. And I know someone's going to say, well, that's not really a metaphor, that's a simile, and that's fine, I understand that whole thing. But like, ultimately what we have is someone says, like, I want this to be a nest, meaning that like, we want kids to feel comfortable and safe here. We want to feed them, and we want to prepare them to fly. I'm like, what a great metaphor, right? Something you can explain in real language to your folks internally and externally. And so I'm seeing more and more folks be able to explain specific spaces in their building, whether they're classroom spaces or other spaces in the building, in that way. And I think we really need simple language that everyone can attach to that allows for us to do that. A couple of other things I see as we kind of talk about that are, some people say things like this to me, like, well, I share a classroom. I'm a special education teacher. I really don't have my own classroom. And what I'm finding is that grade levels, middle school teams, high school departments are starting to say, like, what are the principles around learning space design that we could be pursuing together? Let me talk about what a few of those are going to be, and you guys can kind of see it as I do that. So here's what I'm seeing. Here's some real easy ones. Like, you know what? We are all going to work on the fact that we're going to have less in our spaces than we had last semester. Right? That's not saying you have to throw anything away, and it doesn't mean you have to get rid of your teacher desk and all these little like landmines that you step on as you try to do this work. But it does say like we value the fact that negative space in the room, not negative energy, negative space can be positive for learning. And so how do we start to free up space in our classrooms? And so that can be a principle. Another principle could be, you know what, we want to make sure that the writable space that we have in our rooms, whether that's a desk or a board or a portable whiteboard, we provide more of that space for kids to do writing on than adults right now, right? We have a lot of whiteboards that are full of teacher stuff, and that's super valuable space. So maybe that's a principle that people are pursuing, right? Like, we want to give some of that space back to kids. It could be that, hey, we are dedicated to asking our kids every 2 weeks, what do you like about this space? What don't you like about this space? Now, if you went to a faculty, if you went to a department, if you went to a team and said those 3 things, most people would be like, all right, I can live with that, right? There's nobody saying, hey, you need to get rid of your teacher desk, you need to get rid of all your desks in your classroom, you need to paint your class. No one's saying any of those things. We're trying to find 3 or 4 principles that together we could be pursuing. I've seen that really powerful in schools. Now sometimes it's a team, and sometimes it's a grade level, and sometimes it's a full school. But what are the 4 or 5 principles that we can be pursuing together around space design? That's what we did when we started this room. This is a room we decided to come up with a really fancy name for. It was like Media Design Studio. And people kept saying, oh, you mean room 15? And so it just stuck. We couldn't come up with anything else. It just became room 15. It was right there. So we couldn't get past that. But this room was an old computer lab. I think it was like a technology museum. There were like 37 computers in there. We were a one-to-one school. No one was ever coming there. But this was the catalyst. It was like the foothold, right? Like it was the Utah beach of the work here, right? Like we just need to get some space that was different. And I see a lot of schools do this as well. They say, hey, if we can just get one space where we can get adults to come learn in it and feel what it's like, so that they recognize that no space is neutral. And I think that's an important piece, right? Like no space is neutral. Every space you walk into either gives you energy or it takes it away from you. There's no Switzerland spaces in your school. And so when we were able to bring people into this and they're like, wow, this is awesome. We have no idea how to teach in here, but this is awesome. We're like, oh, we can teach you that part. Hey, bring some kids down here and let's see how they interact with it. And slowly but surely, over about 18 months, we were starting to change the culture and give people that sense of design mindset where they could use some of those 4 things that went along. A couple of other things is working really hard in many of the schools to balance green time and screen time. And what that means is this, and research is really clear. If we can give kids an opportunity to be in nature, see nature, or see images of nature, that reduces stress. And right, so what are we doing to make sure that we provide that for our classrooms? And some of you are like, my classroom is like this, but worse. Like, because the ceiling's like 8 foot tall. It was like the old wrestling room, and that's where I have to. I've heard every story about teaching spaces you can imagine, including the shop teacher that said, well, I teach in the hallway. I'm like, oh, you teach near the hallways. And I'm like, no, my shop is the hallway. I'm like, you have to send me pictures of this. He's like, yeah, it's like woods on the left, metals on the right. And I sent me pictures. It was crazy. He's like, when the bell rings, kids just go right through. I'm like, OSHA problem, but yeah. But ultimately, I've seen everything. And he just said, you know what I started to do was I just started to put images up on my, he actually had like a portable television. He put images of nature up, and he said, you know what, the kids loved it. And I know that sounds weird, but how can we begin to balance that idea that kids are in front of their devices versus kids have their heads up? And sometimes you know what that means? Like, I go into classrooms all the time where like mini blinds are like turned like this, and they're like, I wish I could just walk into school and every mini blind was like up, right? Like I know some people are saying things like, you can't see my projector because it's dull and it doesn't have it, I need a new bulb. I know. But like, no one's ever said like, man, you have the best mini blinds, right? Like no one's ever said that in any school ever. No one's like, oh man, I really love your mini blinds. And so anything we can do to let more natural light into a room, that's actually gonna help kids' attitude, stress, anxiety, and the research is there around that. So that's an easy thing to go along with. Let's go work on principles. Let's see if we can build that. The other thing that I've seen schools working on is this, is like, how do you pursue a color palette? Now you can't do this in a year, right? But like, what you can do is start to say like, we want our space to be a neutral color with a couple of accent colors. And over time, we're going to paint our building that way, we're going to paint our classrooms that way, we're going to start to buy things that fit into a color palette. It might take you a decade to get there, but if you're not pursuing a color palette, here's what happens. You go into Target and you're like, oh, 99-cent bins, they're red, and you take them. And then the next year you're like, oh, great, 99-cent bins, they're green, and then your room is a bag of Skittles. And it may even start like this, right? Like, that room, well, you're not even in that room, and you had the same physical reaction that I had when I was actually in that room. Like, I don't know what Faith was thinking about in this room. I'm actually going to see her at the end of the week. So this is in Huntsville, Alabama, and this was a really cool class, like amazing learning happening, but I'm like, Faith, what is your color palette? Like, this just isn't okay. Like, you don't realize what this is doing to kids, right? This is a caring, amazing human being. She loves kids, she does amazing work with them, but her learning space was actually inhibiting many of her kids from getting the most they could out of her classroom. And I think when we show people pictures like this and they see this, they don't see their space, but like, what is the color palette? What are you pursuing? As much as I don't like this carpet's here, like some of us are stuck with some stuff, like pick 2 colors out of here and go with that, right? Pick blue and purple, I don't care, but like don't like say like, well, I should have orange in here too. Right, but we have this happen all the time. The next thing that's really important is this idea about thin classroom walls, right? Like, how do we make sure that kids feel like the classroom isn't just the one that they're in? This can happen in a number of ways. You're able to send your students beyond the walls to do that. There's some work up in Chappaqua in New York where they took an entire wing of a high school, and I think there were like 12 classrooms, and they turned them into 9 spaces. And so kids can move more fluidly through that space. It's a whole wing. I've never seen somebody, I've seen people do like pilot classrooms and pilot libraries. They just did a pilot wing and they just blew it out. And it looks amazing. Not everybody gets to do that. But when we get kids beyond the walls of the school, this is what started me in this process, right? I'm a middle school principal at an expeditionary learning school where we were outside, out in the community, or outside of the community 20% of the time. And I saw kids like Ethan, who's behind the bees here, who wouldn't do a worksheet, got zeros on all his homework, but when I gave them something like this and they got a space that they could learn like this, I said, well, we've got to do something in our classroom. So this is the justification. We know the kids that we are killing by having them sit in desk for 6.5 hours a day. So we owe something to those kids to keep that moving as well. The other thing that goes with thin classroom walls is a story about my daughter. And so she had to do a report on the Congo. I have no idea why. It was like, I think it was like a lottery system. They just like picked a country out of Africa. But like, I convinced her that she needed to email someone who was really an expert about the Congo. Have you ever experienced this with kids? Like, so, total dad educator thing. I'm like, well, there's a study of Congolese, whatever, at Boston College, you should email. And so she emails this guy, because she's like, Dad, this is ridiculous, you're ridiculous, right? She does it, and like a guy emails her back. She's like, Dad, I got an email. And I said, well, yeah, like adults want to help you. Like, but it was like that moment where she realized that her only teacher wasn't the person that she was standing in front of every day. That's thin classroom walls as well. And that's using technology, that's taking kids into digital spaces. And one of my favorite questions to ask is, who are the other people that teach your class? Who are the other people that lead your building? Because the best teachers I know have 4 or 5 other people that are teaching their class. Whether it's Khan Academy, because their video, my daughter hates Khan, by the way. Like, I met Sal Khan, he's like this tall, and I said, I met Sal Khan. She's like, I hate that guy. I'm like, how do you have like, she's like, his videos, they're the worst. It was an indictment, it was crazy, but that's another story for another time. So another thing I see in schools, and this is one that I think is really important, is the idea that we're designed for kids and not with kids. Right? We're not getting enough feedback from kids about how learning spaces are impacting them. But here's what happens in some places. There's a classroom that a teacher spent all summer designing. She spent $5,000 and complained on Facebook that she spent $5,000 on her kids. So that happened. So this room is beautiful. And she tells her kids, my room is beautiful, don't you think? What do you think all the kids' reactions are? Yeah, yeah. But what happens is, why when kids come up to their teacher after the teacher says, my room is beautiful, I worked really hard on it, and say like, you know what, this is really distracting. Most kids subconsciously don't even know that the classroom is distracting when the perimeter of the room is full of stuff. They don't even know the right language. So we have a responsibility to be out in front of that. We have a responsibility to say like, hey, the classroom that I've designed for kids is not meeting their needs because I've gotten feedback. So I encourage every school I work with, they're put on their calendar every 2 weeks to ask kids in every classroom, hey, what's working for you in here? What's not working for you in here? And you get some amazing feedback from kids. It's a really easy way. The other thing you might do is if you go back to a classroom or go back to a school and go, hey, we just put a bunch of new stuff up in the school, in the classroom, what's new? And if the kids start naming things that have been there since August, then you know that that's a problem. It's a potential distraction of what's going on. So, but when you do design for kids, amazing things can happen, right? And so this was an example. You guys ever played with Z-Space before? Yeah, super cool. And we had it for like 2 weeks. But I stood and watched kids do this because I wanted to see like, are they really going to learn because of it? So I watched and I studied. I became an anthropologist of the students interacting with the stuff. So like, I look at all the furniture that's right outside this door from this great furniture company, really nice people. I talk to them. I'm not getting paid by them. They're really nice people. But their furniture, like all of that will fail in some classroom. All of that won't work in some classroom. So we get a piece and we try it out with kids and we say, what do you think? Where would you use it? What would you use that for? Where would you learn with that? And then what happens is when we have like a little pilot classroom, we pick up some of those things and we carry them off to our classroom and we try them out over there, but we're getting feedback loops from kids. The other thing we can do is videotape our classroom. And I just really encourage people to do the videotaping of themselves, not for evaluation's sake, but videotape an active learning lesson going on in your classroom. Hopefully that happens all the time. Like 10 minutes of video, right? And just watch how kids interact with the space. Especially if you're to a point where you have different types of seats and kids have choice, and just see how they interact during that. Are they having trouble getting around anything? Are they not choosing something? There will be a lot to learn because you can't facilitate learning at the same time that you're actually studying what's happening in the classroom. I mean, that's why coaches watch video, right? You're in the middle of coaching, you're sending players in, you're doing this, and then you're like, oh, I missed what actually happened in the game. As teachers, we need to do some of the same thing around our learning space design. And it's easy. If you have a kid that doesn't do anything in your class, just make him your videotaper, right? Like, he might as well contribute in some form or fashion. Like, if you're not going to do anything, I need you to go over there and tape me for 10 minutes. Can you do that? And you might get an awful commentary. You might need to turn the comments down because, like, some kid's like, there he goes again, he's a jerk, I hate him. But, you know, you're looking for the video, not the audio as it goes. So the other thing you can do to create feedback loops for your kids is this. I've seen more and more schools that are building student design teams for the purpose of identifying and redesigning spaces throughout the school, right? So you grab whatever, you grab a 5th grader, a 3rd grader, a couple 2nd graders, you put them together, you grab a bunch of middle school kids, whatever. Like whatever your configuration is, you're talking about 10 or 12 kids. And you walk around the building and you say like, where are the places in the building that are disgusting? And the first thing they're going to go is like to the cafeteria. I know that one. So then you check that one off the list. That one's fine. But like there are places in the building that you don't even realize like kids don't like to be in. Like that hallway is so dark. It's awful down there. And you identify this list of like 8 or 10 places. And you start to say, okay, let's design them. It doesn't mean you have to implement the design. But all of a sudden you're getting all this rich feedback about what it could be. You're going to have joker kids say, well, I want to slide over there. And can we just put like a slip and slide down? Like, no, you can't do any of those things. But there will be ideas like, well, if we just put a couple tables over there, more kids would go over there and be like, oh, we have a couple of those in storage. Why don't we just try those out? If it doesn't work, you put them back in storage. But all of a sudden we're seeing schools that are regenerating because they have student design teams. Another teacher will say like, hey, I just have a student design team that I bring in for lunch like once a month. And what we do is we stand and we look at the wall and you say like, what's the most important stuff on that wall? And the kid goes, oh, well that number line, I use that all the time. Like, cool, okay. Well, what about that? Like, no, I didn't even know that was there until we started looking at it, right? Like all of a sudden you get another set of eyes on your space by having a student design team, either on a school level or a classroom level, and you keep building those loops, right? I just tell you that when we experience things, we got feedback loops like don't let kids hold jellyfish anymore. So that wasn't ideal, but like I can tell you that young lady, I wish she wasn't just working at CVS. I wish she had an awesome job and like she was doing, but like I can tell you that every time I go into CVS, she goes, remember when we were on that boat? Right? Like she still remembers that because we've created space both in the classroom and beyond. And I think it's not too much of a challenge to ask folks to say, can you do something once a semester, once a year in your school that kids will remember after they leave your school? I think that's a decent challenge, right? How can we create the conditions, the space, and the time to do one thing a semester, one thing a year that kids will remember when they leave your school? So if it's a 2nd grader, by the time they're in middle school, they're like, remember in 2nd grade? If every teacher in the building did something like that, we'd have amazing spaces because it would keep bubbling out. All right, I'm going to tell you about a couple more things as we kind of roll down the home stretch here. I'm going to get you back up in about 2 minutes. So just know that's coming for your introverts. Just get prepared. 2 more minutes. So one of the things I'm seeing in more and more schools is that they're putting pictures of kids doing the learning up throughout the school. Because right now I go into a lot of schools, and as I walk down the hallway, it's a long walk before I actually see what is happening in the school. Joe talked about that being digital, right? Like and getting all that on social media. I'm just saying in a physical space. I can walk into an office, nicest secretaries in the world, and I'm like, man, this place is great. No pictures of kids. I come out in the vestibule, no pictures of kids. I go down the hallway, no pictures of kids. I go into the first classroom, no one's in that classroom yet. It's an empty classroom. I'm like, nothing yet. How do we get more images of kids doing amazing things up in our schools. Now, they can be nice. This is like a big thing in their tech lab. That's awesome. But it can also be like I printed out 8.5 by 11 black and white pictures of my kids doing something pretty cool. And I put them up in my classroom. Because what happens is kids go, oh, that's pretty cool. When do we get to do that? Or you're like, kids are like, man, look at me, I'm actually working. I don't have many pictures of my life where I'm actually doing stuff. Look at that one. Or if a kid's messing around, you can be like, hey, are you doing that? That's what we're doing in here. Come on, let's get with the program. You can do it for a whole bunch of things, but all of a sudden, it tells the story of the learning in a school when there's no kids there. And when there's no kids in your classroom. Wouldn't it be great if a principal or a superintendent could walk into a school or a classroom and just stand in there and go like, all right, I get what happens in here. That'd be pretty powerful. But we have to find more ways to get more pictures of kids. And like, those kids are smiling, but those kids are working. And if we had every teacher in America take at least 2 pictures of amazing kids doing the work every day and share them with someone, we'd have a really different narrative about what goes on. And so this is about creating a space where people are very clear about what's supposed to be happening in that space. And I think it starts with a building principal leading around that, but I think it can happen in classrooms. I got this idea from a pre-K classroom, right? And sometimes I have to scale that out. A pre-K classroom had this like little thing that said like, this is what the scissors look like when we're done. And they were like really nice, and there was like a little picture. I'm like, well, why don't we just do that all the time and have pictures of like what things are supposed to look like when things are going well? Before I show this picture, just a warning. Oh, no, that's not that picture. I'll come back to that picture in a second. About optimizing visual noise. Let's do this. Let's stand up for a second. Why don't we come right down the middle here? Why don't we stand across from someone? I'm not going to play any music or make people do any weird stuff like Joe did. He's weird. I don't like that guy. Yeah, I couldn't imagine living in Fall Creek. Like, he actually is like a testimony about why I don't want to live in rural Wisconsin. Well, have you sit down, that'd be awesome. And if I just have you swing over here, that'd be cool. And then you would be straight across from the, yeah, there, we're getting closer. We got this figured out. Here's the quick conversation that I wanted to have. We got an extra?
We're gonna share Xavier.
That's perfect.
All right.
I like that idea. What is one idea that you've heard so far that's resonating with you? That's a good place to start. So if you would have that conversation with the person across from you, it's going to be noisy. You might have to get closer to listen. But what's one thing you've heard so far that's resonating with you? Go.
Like the student design and having them come into my classroom, like, and then a lot of my own ideas sometimes, what's actually really bad and then make it clear. And then trying to like, having teachers give them
I mean, obviously, it's running it's to venture out, it's the core of the building, but there's still time to change. But then we want to have a teacher right now.
I mean,
There's a problem right now is that so we pour down those kids. So those kids that were at that building got dispersed to 2 other buildings while we're building within the building.
I'm thinking
So they were still in a tight constrained space that was happening in secret. So obviously work people like those that had to come in for some kids. So we got 2 very full buildings. And then what's working in this space, we gotta get a lot of because we're a sell out right now. Everybody else is more often sitting buildings.
All right, thank you for pausing. We have one more question. But I'm going to ask you to go all the way to that end down there, and everybody to slide down one.
All right.
Different people sharing, great. Last question before we come back to sitting down. Which of the elements that we've been talking about do you wish that your classroom or your school was pursuing in a deeper way? Here's one that resonated with me, but here's one that like I wish we were doing when I go back tomorrow. This is the one that I think could really be a lever of change for us. This is the one I think that people could get on board for. However you want to interpret that, this is the what we should be pursuing in a deeper way. Go.
I like that idea.
White walls, concrete floors, and building flexible. Why would you think so? I hate my
In order to do things, you have to go into this is what's possible. So that being great, what they really put
Yeah,
but it's very like it's just very
I mean, I've done that before, like,
So how does that work? Pain, so I go through the good stuff. Like furniture, our new high school we're building, teaching. I go around. So it's kind of interesting touch screen. Did some bright light.
Talk to my colleagues. Just one wall. I don't hang it. Just one wall. You as the principal. Yeah.
They can't. Digital.
That's right.
We're
Well, maybe if you back this, but like the possibility.
All right, we started to finish up our learning there for a second. Perfect. I can see where everybody right down the chute that one. Can somebody share a story they heard someone else mention? What did you hear someone else say that you talked to?
Abby.
Yeah.
Was sharing
Yeah,
about
sure,
how
but
she
you-
wished
yeah.
her district had more autonomy in making decisions within what they can do in the classroom with what their furniture and all these things. And,
Yeah. Yeah, we absolutely. There are definitely limitations around this work. Some people say you can't paint, there's fire marshals, there's whatever. But I know that there are tons of variables we can control. And so I often just try to stay in that frame, right? Like, but there are things that we can't. Like some people are like, well, we can't put up curtains, or we can't have soft seating, or we can't have a couch. Like, I get all of those. I just think there are enough things we can try to break the momentum of what's going on. So thank you for speaking up, and you get a copy book. So there you go. You can share that with someone. Yeah. So have a seat, and we'll get wrapped up.
read through this.
Some final thoughts. I talked a little bit about adding rideable space, but I can say that that is the thing that I see in more schools that really sends a message, right? Whether the rideable surfaces are in the hallway, they're in the classroom, you're adding rideable desks. There's actually a really cool product out there called think-board.com. They're not paying me money, but I really think their product's pretty cool. So think-board.com. You can do a whole set of classroom desks for about $250 and make them rideable. And they're like not like awful contact paper sort of thing. It's like legit. Right, like it almost stands up to like the middle school kid that goes, almost, right? Like at least better than some of the other product will. And I've seen classrooms that have done that. I was surprised. I tried to do this with a math teacher, and she's like, no, I don't want to do that. But a social studies teacher loved having rideable. So it doesn't matter. That is the whole idea is that when kids draw and when kids sketch, learning gets sticky. And the research is really clear on this, right? That's why we've always said, like, make a non-linguistic representation of that in the there, right? Like, we've known, like, as kids draw and sketch, the ideas go deeper, and usually it leads to a conversation. So where do we provide for that in our classrooms? So we had these tables, we bought them from IKEA, they're like $45, right? Like, they don't last forever, they aren't a lifetime purchase. But my favorite thing about these tables was that kids took them and made them teleprompters. I never would have thought, right? They took their entire script and they wrote it down. This was before I knew there was a teleprompter app. And they wrote them all down, and they stood behind the table with a camera, and the kid read their entire script off of them. But I wouldn't have known that they would have come up with an idea like that. But as we added rideable space, we found that kids found a reason to be in there and be creative and collaborate, all the things that are really important. As you're thinking about this, I think it's also important, as you're thinking about space, that you know the most important issues in your community. I was having this conversation with someone the other day, that whether it's water quality or homelessness or employment, if you can have something that's authentic, you can build space around it for kids to do real solution making. And you've probably heard that in other places, but like either classrooms allow for that, or they feel really insular. And I just think that as you're trying to build a learning space that's really robust, we can't leave instruction on the sidelines, right? It's about active learning, it's about purposeful learning, it's about kids that are engaged and happy in the learning. So please, please, please don't be like, I checked the box, I did learning space design. It's a journey about syncing up instructional practices with the actual physical environment. I think it's important that kids have time to present. And how do we allow for that to happen? I mean, one of the things that I'm seeing in kindergarten classrooms is that kids have like an exit ticket at the end of the day. There's a little like photo booth right? Kids go into the photo booth and they press record, and they say, one of my favorite things of today was this, right? That's the precursors to presenting. If you have someone stand up and hold their project up like this and look everyone in the eye, that's a precursor to presenting. I'm now seeing like VR that allows for kids to feel like they're in an auditorium with 200 people and they can present. Like, we have all of these opportunities to create space and time for kids to do that, because like Joe said today, storytelling is impactful, storytelling matters, and we have to get kids space and time to do that. And I think part of building a great learning space allows for that to happen. A couple final things about student choice, right? So student choice does not mean students always have a choice. And I think that some people think that teacher choice is a big part of that. But right now in education, we have often that kids can choose what they learn. We have Genius Hour, right? Like, I'm going to do this Genius Hour project, and they get to learn something they want to learn. We have like how kids learn. Like, oh, you want to learn a blended learning model? You want to listen to me for 50 minutes? Like, we give kids choice. And then we say, hey, if you want to show your work by making a video or by doing a test or making like, we have ways. The one thing we haven't talked about choice is like choice as it comes to where kids learn. And in classrooms, if we just think differently than having like a 1-to-1 butts to seats ratio, right? We have to, I think, break the 1-to-1 butts to seats ratio. 25 kids doesn't have to be 25 desks. In the best classrooms I've been, it's N plus 6. That's the math problem, right? You have 24 kids. Do you have 30 places that kids could be learning in your room? That might mean someone leaning against the wall. That might mean someone sitting on the floor. That might mean somebody at a standing desk. But there's a whole bunch of things we can do to free up floor space for learning, active learning, if we're not stuck on the idea that the 26th kid walks through the door, so your guy calling the custodian, I need another desk. And if you say, well, how are you going to deal with testing? All I can say is, let's design for 90% of the school year where amazing things are going on, and we can get the other piece figured out. If you need a couple things on one day or need to rotate the space, I think all that's a reality. The research is really clear about movement and making sure that that's happening as much as possible, because I guarantee if you don't have movement in your classroom as a cultural norm, kids will move. Can I go to the bathroom? That's what movement looks like in many of our classrooms, right? Kids asking to go to the bathroom. So we're losing instructional time on top of instructional time on top of instructional time because we won't let a kid stand in the back of the room. So it's an important piece of the puzzle. Finding some pretty cool places around the country where kids are able to move and do some amazing things. So let me end with this. 3 things. Know what is at the core of your classroom. Know what the actions are that are central to your learning. In some classrooms, that's explore and discover. In some, that's calculate. In some, that's edit. And some of that's whatever. But if you know the core actions or verbs of your classroom, maybe even your school, you can design amazing instruction around that. You can find technology tools that support that. And you can really begin to figure out your learning environment so that it supports those actions. And when you can answer that question, what are your actions, what are your verbs, some pretty amazing things can happen. I'm seeing it happen all around the country. And hopefully some of these little ideas that you can take back and try tomorrow can begin to break that inertia, momentum, and tradition. If I can be any assistance around your learning space design, please let me know. I actually get pictures from teachers all across the country who are like, look at this awful room, what can you do with this? And so I'm happy to receive those. If I have resources and you're like, hey, will you send me the resources you mentioned? I'm happy to do that. Some people say, hey, do you have the research on that? I'm happy to do that as well. So my job is to find great things and share them with as many people as I can. So thank you for letting me share with you over the last hour. Enjoy lunch, and I'm going to shoot off to St. Louis. Thank you.